Hey guys, this is Josh with DipBabe channel, and today we're going to be discussing a subject that I didn't even think needed discussing really until someone emailed me about it. And that topic is, should you be putting gasoline in your diesel? Now, I've heard of people putting gasoline in diesel. In fact, there's a truck at the shop right now getting the entire fuel system flushed because they accidentally put gas in the diesel tank. But outside of it being an accidental thing, I guess some people actually advocate or actually do put gasoline in their diesel engine. Why would they do that? Now, before I discuss why you should or shouldn't, and to answer the question right away, you shouldn't put gasoline or really anything other than diesel in a diesel fuel tank. But I got an email from Jeff, and he said, I heard somewhere that you could add some gasoline to your diesel fuel tank. Apparently, it makes better gas mileage because of the bigger boom, and it would help the diesel not become gelatinous in cold weather. In light of higher fuel prices and the pending winter, I wonder what your thoughts were and if it would be worth making a YouTube video about. Okay, so basically we have two claims here. Or I shouldn't say claims, there are more questions to me, but basically, let's split them in half. One thing he said was gas mileage, although we're going to say fuel economy because we're talking about diesel engines here, not gas. It's like saying gas pedal. Diesels don't have gas pedals, they have throttle pedals. But one is, does adding gasoline to your diesel fuel increase the fuel economy? And the other one, of course, being, he's saying, would you want to add it to reduce the possibility of it being gelatinous in the winter? So let's talk about the fuel economy question first. And this is a super complicated subject. Got video on fuel economy. And like I said, it's super complicated for a variety of reasons. Fuel economy is not just the engine. Fuel economy is what RPM are you running at? What rolling resistance does your vehicle have? What is the wind resistance, meaning the aerodynamics? There's a lot to fuel economy. If theoretically by adding gas to diesel, you increase the fuel economy of both because they'd be mixed at that point, that would be really cool because fuel economy really has no downsides. The higher the fuel economy, the better it is for everyone involved. I mean, you're talking less fuel burned, which is a lot less operating expenses for the person that is using the fuel. So if you could do that, that would be really good. First, he says, well, gasoline makes a bigger boom. What are we talking about here? A bigger boom. So the combustion process, right? You have your intake, compression, power, and exhaust. It's the power stroke that we're talking about, the combustion cycle. The whole reason the engine exists is to rotate the crankshaft, to rotate the wheels. By adding gasoline, you have a bigger boom. That would theoretically mean you are making more power. But that's not how it works. Gasoline is a lot more flammable, generally speaking, than diesel. If you have diesel and gasoline separated on a table, you could take a match. Don't do this, but you could take a match to the diesel. It's not going to ignite, but the gasoline will if you hit it with a match. So yes, it is more flammable, gasoline that is, not diesel. But that does not mean you would get better fuel economy because one major thing is that gasoline, even though it is more flammable, or I should say more easily ignited, has less energy per gallon than diesel does. You might be saying, what? Yes, it's just a fact, folks. Generally speaking, if you're going to use, we'll use calories, kilocalories. Diesel has about 35,000 kilocalories per gallon of fuel. Now, that's a lot. I mean, milk has 3,500. Diesel has 35,000. Obviously, don't drink it. It doesn't mean it's food. I'm just saying it as a term of energy. Gasoline, however, some people call it petrol, is about 31,000. So it's roughly more than 10% less energy in a gallon of gasoline than there is in a gallon of diesel. Now, this is a big reason why diesel engines are more fuel efficient than gasoline engines because they actually have more energy per gallon. So it would be hard for them to be less efficient when they're already starting off with over a 10% increase in fuel density per unit. I mean, if you're measuring them in liters instead of gallons, it would still be the same percentage, but obviously a liter would have a lot less calories than a gallon of diesel. So that claim is pretty much out the window just based on gasoline having a lot less energy per gallon than diesel, and a lot of that, you have to think energy is what's moving the vehicle. It's converting that energy in combustion into a lot of heat, and that's what's moving the vehicle. Okay, so even though we only discussed it for a few minutes, we basically showed that the gasoline mix is not really going to help in the fuel economy department. Now, the other side, and this can tie into a lot of things, is the gelatinous nature. Now, I'm not talking about jello, but gelling of diesel fuel. Some people, it clouds. Basically, as diesel fuel cools, it can start to solidify. It's not going to get rock hard. It doesn't turn to ice, but it can what they call gel up. And that's because there's paraffin waxes in number 2 diesel. And that can cause real problems as the temperature decreases. This can start showing at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but generally it's got to be a lot colder than that before it can be a problem. And this can be a big problem. If it does start to gel or cloud, it can start to plug filters. It can start to plug lines. And when this happens, you don't get any fuel flow. If you don't have fuel flow, you're not getting fuel to the injectors. In that case, the engine is not going to run. So this is a big problem, and there's a lot of solutions, or I should say, things that can help diesel not do this. And what I mean by that is not gel. Basically, there's a couple of things. They can do additives to the diesel fuel, which will prevent it from gelling or lower the temperature at which it will gel. And those and some other things we'll discuss here in a little bit can kind of make what they call a winter blend for diesel. And this is very important, especially in very cold climates, because if your diesel gels, your engine's going to shut off. Now, other than the fuel itself, there's a variety of things you can do to prevent it from gelling. You can insulate the tanks, and the diesel fuel is going to be heated because it's generally going through the engine, and it uses the fuel to help cool the fuel pump and the injectors. It runs through the cylinder head generally and then returns to the tank. Now, as this is cooling those items, it's heating up the fuel. So as the fuel is warm, if it's going to be 50, 60, 70, 100 degrees or higher, it's not going to gel. But as it's going from the tank, as it's going back into the engine, that's when it can gel. Now, there's a couple things you need to understand. It's not always the gelling that's causing problems in the fuel system. Moisture, a lot of times, water in the diesel fuel can actually be what's actually causing clogging, and there's almost always some moisture, hopefully not a lot, in your fuel, diesel fuel that is possibly plugging up your system. Remember, diesel will not turn to ice, only water will do that. So if you have ice, hard pieces in your fuel, that is water, and you need to address that. Now, would adding gasoline fix this problem? Well, yes, adding gasoline would probably help because gasoline does not have the same problems with gelling that diesel fuel does. But gasoline and diesel, while they will mix, they won't separate like oil and water, but they operate way different. Gasoline is much more like a solvent than diesel, which is more like a light oil. And like I already said, most diesel engines use the diesel fuel to cool both the fuel pump and the injectors, sometimes even the electronic control module. They also rely on that diesel fuel for lubrication. Now, diesel fuel is not a great lubricant, but it's a much, much, much better lubricant than gasoline is. Gasoline, anyone's ever worked with it, basically will strip oils off of everything. So it's a lot more like a solvent. So the last thing you want to do is have any gasoline going to any of your extremely expensive parts like your fuel pump or your injectors. So that in and of itself is probably the best reason never to put gasoline in a diesel engine. Not only that, since gasoline is much more flammable and much more volatile than diesel, it doesn't burn right in a diesel engine. A diesel engine is relying on a lot of heated air due to high compression ratios to ignite fuel that's injected under very high pressure. Gasoline generally runs lower compression ratios and relies on a spark to ignite the gasoline. So you're probably, even if it wasn't damaging the injectors, it's not going to run right. It's not going to run the same as it would in a gasoline engine. That's why gasoline engines are made for gasoline and diesel engines are made for diesel. They should not be mixed. Now, there is something called a winter blend where they blend number 1 diesel, or some people call it kerosene. And number 1 diesel isn't necessarily kerosene, although from much of the research I could do, most of what number one diesel is also kerosene. I also found out that kerosene is actually used in most jet fuel. I didn't know that. Pretty interesting. And what kerosene is it's a fuel that's distilled from crude oil, just like gasoline and diesel, but it's in between the two. So diesel fuel is closer to the oil end during the distillation process, and gasoline's closer to the top of the distillation process where propane's made. Kerosene's in between the two. And kerosene is, like I said, it's kind of in between there, but it's closer to diesel fuel, and it doesn't have as many problems as mixing gasoline is. So should you just dump kerosene in there? No. If you're going to be running in very cold conditions, try to get a diesel blend for winter. And like I said, there's other things you can do to address the system. For winter, there's additives, there's fuel heaters, you can insulate your tanks, there's a bunch of things. But I thought it was a pretty interesting subject to discuss and learn a little bit myself. Hopefully you learned something. Thanks for watching. Okay, so we have two claims here, or I should say two questions.